I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I am Hannah Riley Bowles. I am on the faculty here at the Harvard Kennedy School, where I wear multiple hats, but I'm here in the capacity today as the co-director of our Women and Public Policy program at the Harvard Kennedy School. Our mission at WAP is to equip leaders and change makers with rigorous evidence-based strategies to advance women and gender equity. And we are very excited this fall to be co-hosting this seminar focused on intersectional perspectives on gender in negotiation with the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School. PON, as it's known, is an inter-university consortium among Harvard, MIT, and Tufts, dedicated to connecting rigorous research and scholarship with deep understanding of practice. So we have kindred missions at WAP and PON, and we're delighted to be doing this seminar together. I'd love to call out my co-hosts from the program on negotiation, Jared Curhan, who is the Gordon Kaufman Professor and a Professor of Work and Organizational Studies at MIT's Sloan School of Management, and Julian Zlatev, who is an Assistant Professor of Business Administration in the Negotiation, Organizations, and Markets unit at Harvard Business School. Before we start, I want to offer a virtual land acknowledgement. We are meeting virtually today, but this work is stemming from a physical space from which we would like to acknowledge and honor local indigenous communities. The land on which Harvard University sits is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary unceded homeland of the Massachusetts people, the surviving descendants of the first people of Massachusetts, and of the Neponset Band of the Massachusetts. Today, we have Professors Melissa Reinberg and Daniel Ames, who are going to be presenting on the challenges and successes of bringing negotiation skills training to underserved communities. Melissa is the founder and executive director of Negotiation Works, and Dan Ames is a professor of business at Columbia Business School's Management Division. At Negotiation Works, Professor Reinberg seeks to empower people from marginalized communities with tools to manage conflicts, advocate for themselves and others, and build more stable lives. And Professor Reinberg also serves as a community mediator with DC's Superior Court's multi-door dispute resolution program, has taught simulation-based negotiation and mediation at Georgetown for 17 years, and was previously a mediator with the U.S. Office of the Special Counsel and legal director of the Legal Aid Society of the District of Columbia. Professor Ames, Dan Ames, is the creator of Negotiable, which you have to Google and check out. I was checking out and it was very impressive. Online resource is the creator of Negotiable, a collection of digital resources that helps people build and apply their ability to negotiate. Professor Ames is also a leading scholar in the negotiation field. His work is published in journals of psychology and organizational behavior, and has also been profiled widely in the press, including outlets like the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. Both of them experts in negotiation. They're going to be talking about the societal need for programs such as the ones they're going to describe today, and also the challenges, opportunities, successes, and stumbles in creating and implementing them. Each Professor Reinberg and Professor Ames are going to each present for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions. So we're going to hold anything but clarifying questions until they've each had an opportunity to share their work. So please join me in welcoming our speakers today. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm really excited about this session.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and really thank you for inviting us to be part of this seminar series. And I've had the pleasure to watch some of the sessions in the series and have really enjoyed learning about the cutting edge research involving gender and negotiation. And we were invited here today not to talk about research so much, but really, as Hannah said, to talk about the practical application of negotiation theory and research. And for me, that is through a nonprofit organization called Negotiation Works. This is an organization that I founded in 2018 and I currently run. And through this organization, as Hannah indicated, we teach negotiation skills training to people in marginalized communities. And what I want to talk about this afternoon, I want to share, what we do. I want to talk about what motivates our work. I want to talk about how we go about designing and teaching our program and what we've learned along the way and the impact we've had. So it's a lot to cover in 20 minutes, but I'm determined to do it. And so let me share my screen, get my slides. Okay, so this is Negotiation Works. And in sort of broad brush, what we do is we provide negotiation and self-advocacy training courses for people who are coming out of difficult and frequently traumatic situations such as coming out of prison, coming out of homelessness, coming out of dealing with substance abuse, domestic violence, and the like. And the goal is to help our participants develop skills that they can use as they're sort of moving forward in their lives, as they can navigate sort of everyday challenges that they face as they try to have the next chapters be productive and be confident in that. So when we talk about negotiation, we have a very broad definition of that. What we mean by negotiation are communication and persuasion strategies that individuals can use in sort of two categories of interpersonal situations. The first is to resolve sort of everyday problems, disputes, disagreements, and the like. And the second is using negotiation to advocate on your own behalf to get what you need for yourself, or to advocate on behalf of someone else so that they can get what they need. And I want to give you an example before we go through the rest of the slides, just to give you some context about the work that we do and what it looks like. And this is an example that comes from one of our participants who went through our program a couple of years ago. She was in a program for a transitional housing program for women experiencing homelessness. She is now out of that program and living independently in an apartment. And she is disabled and has disability income to support herself. And she recently shared with us a story about how she used the negotiation strategies that she learned in her class. She needed to get some emergency dental work done. There was a dentist across the street from her apartment, so she went and got the emergency work done, and there was a lot of follow-up work that needed to be done. And the dentist told her that the additional work was going to cost several $1,000s. She has insurance, Medicaid insurance, but she discovered that her medical insurance, Medicaid, was not going to cover those costs. So she immediately started trying to figure out, how else can I pay for this? And she went and looked at a lot of other resources around the city, even started looking to see if there were other dental providers that could do the work for less. She came up empty-handed and decided she would go back to the dentist and share her story. And so she did. And in response, the dentist told her that he would do the work and only ask her to pay 1/3 of the original bill that he had charged her, but that he wanted it as a lump sum. And she appreciated, the initial offer, but said, I'm on a fixed income and I can't pay that as a lump sum. But because I'm on a fixed income, I can pay in installments. And as an added bonus, I live right across the street. So, I can come over here, you know where to find me. And, is this going to be acceptable? And the dentist told her yes. For us, this is really negotiation at its finest, right? It's, someone who is able to see a situation, explore what her different options are, And then she had the confidence to go and share her story with the dentist and say, this is what I can do. And when he came back and it was something that she didn't think was going to be workable, she kept at it until there was an agreement that worked for her. Okay. So with that kind of backdrop, I want to turn to the next slide, which talks about why we do what we do, what motivates our work. And you'll see that there are 6 bullet points here, but I have 4 reasons. So I'm going to condense these bullet points into 4 reasons. And the first reason is that the majority of the participants in our program come from low-income communities of color. And so we really look at, and these communities have not previously had access to negotiation training, customized negotiation training. So we really look at the program that we provide through the lens of empowerment to offer strategies that individuals can use to address sort of centuries of structural racism and discrimination. The second sort of issue that motivates our work is that negotiation skills are very practical, they're very tangible. And we know from the research, not only are they teachable, but they work, right? And people are able to use them to get what they need. And so many of our participants have so many needs to get a job, to get a place to live, to repair the relationships with family. So we provide these because they're useful, right? The third reason has to do with trauma. So many of the participants in our program have experienced trauma either individually or community-wide. They've experienced trauma either throughout their childhood or throughout their adulthood, or all of the above. And we know from the research about ACEs and other research about trauma that people who've experienced a lot of trauma, when they have a lot of toxic stress, often they can develop patterns of responding to that stress that involves fight or flight, right? And often that has a very protective measure. You want to protect yourself from danger. But when you are facing a stressful conflict situation, responding to that situation with fight or flight is not always the most effective or productive approach. So we look at the work that we do as offering an alternative model or pattern for individuals to use so that they can approach those situations through planning, with intention, and with a lot of confidence. And then the fourth and the final reason is that a lot of our participants, particularly women, and particularly people coming out of prison, really look at negotiation as something very mysterious, something very formal, something that's done, where you sit down in a boardroom and all dressed up, and that can be very intimidating. And so we present the concept of negotiation as something that you do absolutely every day in all sorts of matters, big and small, to really take away that intimidation factor so that people feel comfortable sort of internalizing these concepts and using it every day. That is what motivates our work. I want to talk now about what it is that we do. Right? So our signature program involves multi-week negotiation courses, and we deliver them in partnership with community-based organizations. So as Hannah said, we're located in Washington, D.C., so we have a number of partners who are local to the DC area. Our partners include programs for people experiencing homelessness. They include workforce programs for people coming out of prison. They include people who are currently incarcerated. And we work with our partners to come up with ways to customize our program to address the specific needs of their clients or their constituents. Right? What we do in each of our class sessions is we present one element or one aspect of negotiation, and then we connect it to role plays and scenarios that we've designed to be resonant to and familiar with the participants. So, for example, we have scenarios involving child support, involving the return of a security deposit, involving changing your hours at work. Right? And during the classes, what we do is really encourage the participants to apply the concepts that we're presenting and that they're practicing in these role plays to whatever it is they're dealing with in their everyday lives. The participants, as they go through the program, also have an opportunity to develop their own personalized set of negotiation strategy tips. So at the end of the course, they have this wonderful list of their strategy tips. And we also provide our own sets of resource material that they can keep. And some of that you can see on the slide there. So since we've started doing this work, actually started teaching the classes in 2017, we've taught a lot of these classes. We've taught a lot of multi-week courses. We've taught a lot of individual classes, and we've had a lot of community members who have gone through our program. We're actually finishing a course this week on Thursday, and we started another course just this morning with the Georgetown Pivot program. So we typically have several courses going on at any given time. The next slide just shows some of the community partners who we've worked with, local, again, local to the DC area. So since we've done all this work, what have we learned? Right? We've learned a lot. And I first want to talk about the lessons that we've learned about designing negotiation curriculum. And I think this goes without saying, but such an important feature is that we factor in the unique needs of the community that we're working with, right? We want to understand what are the specific needs of, say, the returning citizen community, people coming back to the community from prison. And we do this in a number of ways. And one of the ways we do this is we are very involved in community collaboratives and initiatives that include other organizations that are also working to support the reentry community. We also solicit the lived experience of community members, and mostly this is done through our participants. They share with us what situations they're dealing with, what are the experiences they're having that call for negotiation, and we use those when we develop our role plays and scenarios, and to tweak the ones that we do to make sure that they stay current and fresh and resonant. Trauma is a really important piece to our curriculum, and we certainly remain cognizant of that throughout the classes. The issues of trauma can come up for our participants really at any point. Sometimes they're at places where we would expect to see them. So for example, if we're talking to a group of domestic violence survivors, if we're doing an example relating to domestic violence, you might expect to have that there. But sometimes it can come up for participants when we're dealing with the question of returning a security deposit because of a broken window. Right. So we just don't know what's going to be triggering for our participant community. So we certainly make sure we train our instructors accordingly. And the other thing that we do is we have certain strategies that we use in our role plays to help distance the participants from the specific scenarios, so it doesn't feel too close to home. And then the final sort of lesson that we've learned about curriculum design, the last one is really, it's a COVID bullet point, right? When we started teaching these classes, we were all in person, and when everything shut down, we didn't have a Zoom version of our class. We taught our first Zoom class about a week after everything shut down in DC. I would not say it was the most polished class we taught, but since then, we've been able to redo our curriculum, and now our curriculum is structured so that it can be delivered either in person or remotely or hybrid. Although we don't like doing hybrid, but we can do that. Right? The other piece about the various platforms is that not all of our participants or of our partners have the same level of access to technology or really ability to use technology. So while we would love to do everything over, Google Forms or the like, we can't always do that. We have to account for all the different possibilities. Some people are able to use electronic versions of our materials, and some are not. So having all of that available from the get-go is really helpful. I want to talk now about our impact. And I first want to just talk about how we measure impact. As you may have picked up, we get a lot of stories from our participants as they go through the course about how they're using negotiation in their own lives. So we collect a lot of anecdotes from our participants, not just the one that I shared a few minutes ago about the dentist, but we hear from our participants as they go through the course. So I use negotiation in dealing with a roommate situation, or I use negotiation to persuade a caseworker to give me a 24-hour pass, or I use negotiation as I was talking with a family member about whether or not we'll get our child vaccinated. Right? We also administer a number of surveys during sort of before and after and during our course to collect other measures of our impact. And in the next few slides, I will go through what some of those look like. So in this slide, you can see what our participants share with us, that these are the negotiation concepts that they find to be really most, that they remember the most, they find most meaningful, right? Understanding about the value of taking the perspective of the other person who they're dealing with, right? The concept of BATNA. I don't think I have yet encountered one of our 742 participants who had previously been exposed to the BATNA concept. And so it's a new concept and something that they absolutely can relate to and find so useful and so helpful as they move forward. And then the specific communication strategies that we talk about. How do you listen in negotiations, and how do you make your specific ask? That's what they share with us that they find particularly useful. We also look to see sort of what are the categories of situations in which they find negotiation most useful as they're going through the course. And you can see from this slide that a lot of them find these strategies to be extremely useful in family situations. But there are a lot of other situations that they find these strategies to be useful as they're dealing with employment, housing, friends, roommates, romantic partners, case managers, and the like. We look to see if participants change sort of how they approach negotiations before and after the course. And we do that by providing a couple of scenarios and asking them both before and after they take the course how they would deal with those scenarios. And this is one of the scenarios that we provide deals with sort of a landlord-tenant issue. And what we have found is that after the course, there is a significant decrease in participants who sort of use accommodating or avoiding approaches, right? So I hope if I do nothing that this situation is going to be magically fixed, right? There's a decrease in that. There's also a decrease in participants who use a more sort of confrontational or a fight approach from the get-go, right out of the gate. Let's just take them to court. Right? And what that's replaced with is an increase in participants who use a more collaborative approach. Let's see if we can sit down and work out this situation. We have also found that participants are statistically more confident, they're self-reporting, that they're more confident at using negotiation to advocate on their own behalf after they take the course than they were beforehand. And we really put this together with the finding on the previous slide that they're less likely to use accommodating or avoiding responses to show that they are finding these concepts to be quite empowering. We have also just started looking at participants and their sort of 6 or more months after they've taken the program to find out really what they remember about the course and how, if and how they're finding the strategies still to be useful. And what they are telling us is they are finding the strategies to be useful in all of these categories. As I wrap up for now, I wanted to share some of the feedback that the participants have given to us. And I'm just going to concentrate on the two on the bottom of this slide and start from the very bottom. And this was a participant who talks about how before, before she took the course, she was very much a my way or the highway, right? This is how I resolve disputes. And that what she learned from the course is that there are lots of different ways to resolve disputes, and sort of staying calm and listening is really going to be hopefully her go-to from there on out. The second from the bottom participant, Kiki, talks about how when she started in the course, she really avoided negotiation. She didn't like conflict. She would just walk away, give in, and that she really found her voice and really found that she knew how to prepare, how to think about arguments, and really felt like she was ready to address conflict and get what she needed for herself. So we have, through the programs that we have been teaching over the past 5 or so years, we have truly seen the transformational power of bringing negotiation strategies to underserved communities, and are just feel so fortunate that we're able to do this work. My last slide that has our website. Please feel free to go and check it out. You can subscribe to our newsletter. We don't send them out too often, so you won't get too many emails. It has our Twitter handle, our Facebook link. We're also on LinkedIn and Instagram if you want to follow us there. So let me stop there and turn this over to Daniel.
Thank you so much, Melissa. This is really compelling work. Daniel, please take over from here. I think you can present your slides.
I hope you can see those slides. So those coming through? Great. And I want to just thank Hannah for inviting us here today, and thank Melissa for that fantastic description of the important work that you're doing. And I'm excited to hear the conversation that's going to follow this. I'm really happy to be here with you today to tell you about some of the lessons we've learned in our REAP, the Reentry Acceleration Program at Columbia Business School. And I want to say right up front that this is very much a collaborative effort involving a lot of people. My faculty colleagues, Sandra Motz and Shai Davidai, are involved in coaching our teams and leading some of the sessions that we do. And this is also part of the Tamer Center for Social Enterprise. So I'm kind of giving you the institutional map of where our program resides for those who might be interested. So I'm a faculty member at Columbia Business School within Columbia University. We have a fantastic institution called the Tamer Center for Social Enterprise. One of their many programs is the Reentry Acceleration Program. And one part of the Reentry Acceleration Program is the negotiation course. They also teach financial literacy and entrepreneurship skills, but my focus is on this negotiation course piece. And for the last few years, we've been doing this in partnership with another program here at Columbia University, the Justice Through Code program, which is itself one of the programs from the Center for Justice. And so we essentially piggyback on a code class that teaches Python and other coding skills to formerly incarcerated and justice impacted individuals. And so our negotiation course sort of goes along for the ride. And I'll say a little bit more in a few minutes about how we do that. What I'm hoping to do today is get to some lessons learned and at least briefly review some of those. And then hopefully that will spark some conversation. Maybe we'll dig deeper into some of those. But I feel like first I want to describe kind of what we've been doing and who we're doing it with. So the participants in our course are the participants in the Justice Through Code course, which has several cohorts per year. And most of them come to this course with little or no prior negotiation or conflict training. Some of them say they've had some of that, but very few tell us that they've actually had a course on this before. And so we're complementing some of the technical skills training they're getting with some interpersonal skills training. That's what we're doing. Their class meets multiple nights a week on Zoom for an entire semester, learning Python and other coding. Our negotiation course meets 7 times throughout a semester. every other week or so for a 2-hour-long Zoom session. And it involves no Python or coding or technology skills training whatsoever. So we see them every other week, which gives them a chance to sort of do work between our sessions and gives us a chance, our teaching team, a chance to prepare. And this isn't something that I'm delivering or Sandra or Shai are delivering directly. We're leading teams of MBA students. This is consciously our model for doing this. We have typically teams of 4 Columbia Business School MBA students who've already had a negotiations elective, and they end up doing the teaching. They tag team the teaching, and we are essentially a coach, a mentor, a support for them. And for these MBA students, I can say more about this later, but it is a transformative experience for them, that they not just learn teaching skills, but they really change their view of mass incarceration in the United States and their view of formerly incarcerated individuals. So this is a really profound experience for our students as well as our teaching team. And I want to say a little bit about the sequence of this, because some of you may be involved with negotiations courses or teaching. And so I want to at least give you a little sense of kind of like how we set this up across the sessions. And I would say we do it kind of conceptually. We don't move from one like work domain to, rental, healthcare domain to housing domain. We kind of build it conceptually, very much like how I think about the MBA negotiations elective that I've been teaching for almost 2 decades. But we've adapted our cases, and Melissa called this out earlier about making sure that the teaching materials and the activities feel relevant and resonant for our participants. So we've been thoughtful about doing that, and kind of really adapting things, often cases, into small business contexts where they could imagine themselves being the protagonists in those cases. So let me give you a quick tour, and I can say more in the Q&A if people are interested, but just here, what do we do with these 7 2-hour sessions that we have with our students? We start off with kind of talking about simple zero-sum bargaining. And the first thing we do in our first class is we do the role play. Our teaching team, our MBA students, do a role play in front of the students with the students cheering them on, because many of them have never done a role play before. They've never seen a role play before. And so we try to raise the comfort level by being a little bit vulnerable and putting ourselves out there doing these things. And it really models for them how we want them to engage in these role plays. And then they start beginning their own sequence of role plays as we go along. So we start off with a simple tug of war bargaining over rent at a co-working space. And then we start to build on this. In our second session, we now have a full mix of issues, a pre-scored multi-issue negotiation of the kind I think many negotiation instructors are familiar with, where they're doing value claiming and value creation. They have the potential to trade priorities and uncover compatibilities. And then we start to switch into a role play where they have to articulate the values. And we spend a whole session with them doing the process of multi-attribute valuation, where they read a scenario and they break up into a landlord and a tenant side, and each half of the class has a robust discussion about what's their point of view on each of these issues in the negotiation. And they build their own scoring table, and we support them in doing that. And then in the next session, they bring that to life. The landlords and the tenants get together and they have that negotiation. They work their way through that. And so now they're thinking about how to articulate my preferences, and then how do we exchange information, and what do I share and what do I hold back, and how do I draw things out from my counterpart. We then build on this. So now we've had sort of like these formal scored negotiations, and we move our way into a negotiation that is Texoil-like, if any of you know that case, where there's like what seems like a negative bargaining zone, but there's some clues planted in the case that allow them to find a solution. And we craft that session in a way that everybody kind of hits a wall and feels the experience of there seems to be no deal here. And then we reframe it and they come at it again, and everybody experiences this breakthrough moment where they find a deal where it initially appeared that there was none. And it ends up being a really powerful experience for them, making these ideas about surface level positions and underlying interests really pop out for them. And then we move to one specific, we take all those ideas and we apply them now finally to one specific domain of job negotiations. And we help them think about this in a career context. We do another role play and we think about themselves and the job negotiations that they're going to face. And initially we thought, well, that's it, we'd be done. But then we said, why not give them a chance to take the floor? And so we have a final session where they present their takeaways. And I have to bring the Kleenex, even though I'm on Zoom, because it's a tear-inducing session of just really powerful emotional stories where there's a lot of laughing and a lot of crying. And one of our most recent ones, somebody wrote a song and sang a song to the whole class. And it's this really powerful moment where they experience something I think many of them sometimes don't get to experience, which is they're in the spotlight and they're telling their own story and they're cheering each other on. And it's really remarkable and powerful. One last thing I'll say real quick about kind of how we do this is across all of these sessions. I'm used to working with MBA students where, we do the role play and then we do a debrief and you debrief in your team. But here we sort of embrace this model of peer learning teams where in different weeks, they're doing role plays with different people on different teams. But in every session, they keep going back to the same group of 3 or 4 or 5 people. And that becomes this constant peer learning team throughout the whole class. And that's where they really talk about their lives and they connect the ideas to their situations. And they really bond with each other and support each other. And it's really a remarkable, we kind of did this as an experiment initially, and I'm now a complete convert to the power of this model, so much so that I now bring this back into my MBA classrooms. This is something I learned from doing this program that's affected how I teach MBA students. So that's my quick tour of what are we doing. Now, let me try to give a quick tour of what have we learned from this? And this is my own subjective take. I'm going to try to tee up 7 different lessons that I've taken from this. And I'll be happy to dig in more to these depending on the interests and the question and answer session. And I will say some of these I think resonate really nicely with things that we've already heard from Melissa. So the first thing that I'm struck by is just how profound the impact can be. And I don't take credit for that myself. My credit goes to the teaching team that we've supported, but also to the just tenacity and bravery and commitment of our students who come to this topic with a little bit of apprehension and awkwardness, and they just end up saying for many of them, it ends up being life-changing. And we hear this from them during the session. They're saying this to us. We hear this in session 7 when they're talking about what they take from the course. And we hear some of this when we do our follow-up surveys. And so in one of our recent follow-up surveys, we've asked them, what did you take from this class? Has this helped you a little bit or a lot or not very much across different domains? And 90-ish% of people say it's helped somewhat or a great deal in their own careers. So negotiating for their own work circumstances, for instance, in the substance of the work that they do. So some of them are involved in sales or in things related to business development. And so they say they've harnessed this to actually do the work that they do in the workplace. And I will say, probably most of our conversation is in this direction in the class, but we ask them as well about their own personal experiences in their own families and in their own communities with their neighbors and so forth. And again, we see remarkably high numbers of people saying it's actually helped them in those domains as well. And so we're thrilled to see this. But we also think there's a kind of a multiplier effect that goes on, that we urge them to share what they've learned with the people around them in their lives. And when we ask them in the follow-up survey, have they done that? The vast majority of them say that they've shared what they've learned with some others or with many others. And I'm certain the same thing is true in Melissa's programs, that has this kind of multiplier effect in families and communities. So that first lesson, I think we're having a great impact. And it's not like we have some special secret. I think there's so much that we as a community of negotiation scholars and teachers know that can benefit other underserved communities, and the impact can be tremendous. Now, I'm also interested as a scholar, as a social scientist, in what are we doing? What are we changing in people? And Melissa called out some of the concepts that she's heard people refer to as takeaways, and we've heard similar things from our students. I will just say they dramatically change, most of them, nearly all of them, dramatically change their narratives around negotiation. And I could go on at this, but I'm gonna try to restrain myself to sort of 3 different things by what I mean by this. One is, I think they changed their narrative about the relevance of negotiation. So these students are coming into this coding class, and then they're getting this negotiation class as a bonus. So they haven't sought it out. They haven't really signed up for it. Some of them are a little bit bewildered why they're taking this, because they feel like negotiation doesn't really matter to me. It's not something I do very often. And I think we give a very similar broad definition to negotiation that Melissa referred to before. Anytime two or more people with different points of view try to have a conversation and figure out how to move ahead, that's a negotiation. And I think what happens over the course of our sessions is they start to see this is absolutely pervasive in my life. And there's a set of skills here that are learnable and that are widely applicable, and it's worth my investment. So I really think we're changing their story around that. I think we're also changing their stories around the nature of negotiation. And this is, again, echoing some things that Melissa said. Like, many people come in and think negotiation is a battle or a war. And so that means you got to fight hard. And for others, they think that means you got to surrender. But I'll say the same thing is true for the MBA students who walk into my classes each year, that they all have their own narrative around negotiation. And we end up rewriting, or let's say we empower them to rewrite their own narrative. And so I think they're doing some of the same sort of evolution in their thinking of sort of understanding it's not just about value claiming, but there's potential for value creation. And when you start to understand that negotiation involves really having thought through your own perspective and tried to understand a counterpart's perspective, then they start to realize it's not just something you wing, it's something you've got to prepare for. And I think that is part of their changing narrative. The third and final version of what narrative I think it's changed is really about themselves and their worth. And I will say, I wasn't expecting this. As someone who came kind of naive to this space, I'm used to teaching students who are fully acquainted with their ample self-worth, right? Like they don't necessarily need any encouragement to think about what they deserve necessarily, right? And here, I think we've been struck by what a deep and profound challenge this is. Sometimes we call this the private drama, the negotiation that you have with yourself. And I just want to bring some of their words, because their description of this is way more powerful than what I could say. Here's what one student told us reflecting on the course. The common denominator with almost anyone who's incarcerated is low self-worth. Here's to me, this next comment is almost poetic, and it was just ad-libbed by one of our students in his kind of spontaneous reflections on the course in session 7. You can't convey what you want if you believe you're not worth what you're seeking. To me, that's just really, really powerful. And that's something that they're working on, they're confronting throughout this class. Another person said, being just as impacted, I no longer had the self-confidence or personal value to move forward and advocate for myself. And so I think this is a real deep and profound and persistent challenge. One last one that I'll put up here. Before this class, I felt I was by myself, like I wasn't worth asking for anything. My biggest takeaway is that you have to squash your demons and believe that you are worth it, no matter what your past is. And so I think this is a really profound experience for a lot of our students. And we're not in there necessarily session after session with slides saying you're worth it, you're worth it, you're worth it. I think it's an emergent realization and journey that they go through in this class. And it makes me think of the work of Mary Parker Follett. Maybe there's some Mary Parker Follett fans in the session, who talked about just having as great a respect for your own view as for others to be effective in negotiation, to have a real curiosity about what is it that matters to the other side, what problem are they trying to solve, where is value for them. But it's not just about unmitigated empathy towards the other side, it's also having respect and care for what is it that matters to me, where are my red lines, what do I want to achieve here, what behavior and treatment will I endure or reject. And I think this is part of the narrative around negotiation our students are developing as they go through this course. I'll quickly go through some of our remaining lessons here and then hope to welcome anyone who wants to dig into these more in our Q&A to do that. I think the right learning climate is critical. So you can't have thoughtful, deep, transformative conversations about self-worth if you don't have the right climate in the class. And so this class is going deep. And so that climate is really critical. And we're asking people to take real risks by throwing themselves into a role play, which for many of them initially is like this slightly weird thing to do. And so the safety you build in this class is really vital. And we build some of it, like I said, in our first session, by putting ourselves out there and being a little vulnerable and ridiculous and starting to kind of build that community. And the way that we know that sometimes it's less about what we say than how we react. And so I spend a lot of my time coaching our teaching teams, not just on the points to drill into people about negotiation, but how do you respond to a comment or a question from somebody in a way that makes them feel glad that they raised their hand and took that risk? And part of the climate, I think, comes from peer learning, the way that we use peers. So like I said before, we use these stable peer groups across the sessions, and that's been like critical to building and maintaining the right kind of climate. And that also allows us to get into topics that, frankly, I just can't speak to with any authority. Our teaching teams, whether it's our faculty or our MBA students, like we come from positions of privilege, and there's just real limits to what we can credibly talk about with our participants. And so we lean on peer learning to help people engage with some of this. Here's what one student recently told us. Racism is always the elephant in the room. I'm not used to professionally diverse spaces. The world around me consists of people of color. But that imposter syndrome I face when I come into diverse spaces, like in the workplace, is always the loudest voice. And this class has shown me that I'm not the only one who thinks like that. There's not a whole lot I can put on a slide or I can say that's going to be a relevant, helpful thing for this question, but the fellow participants in that class can help. And so what we do is frame topics and create time and space for conversation in small groups and in larger groups to allow them to talk this through. And we realize like we don't have to have all the answers, but we can call out these topics and give them space to engage with each other, and really powerful things happen. So that's peer learning. One more lesson I'm going to note here, program partnerships can be really effective. The way that we've teamed up with this program, Justice Through Code, has been great, that they kind of recruit everybody to the class and they provide this platform and the scheduling, and we've sort of piggybacked on top of that. That is a very unique model here at Columbia, but I just want to kind of open up that idea that there's ways to do this kind of teaching in kind of connecting with other existing programs, leveraging them. We've also seen that the classroom can really effectively be flipped. That we really struggled initially with how can we impart the content and how should we use the precious time that we have with people. And we really wanted to use that time for discussion and hands-on role play and debriefing and connecting the dots rather than lecturing about concepts and definitions and principles. And so we've really relied heavily on this platform, Negotiable, that I've developed in part to support programs like this, which has videos and worksheets and other content that go through some of the basics of kind of laying the groundwork, providing frameworks for thinking about things and unpacking it. And between our sessions, we assign people to watch videos and complete worksheets. And they come to the session and then we kind of discuss the video, make sure everybody's seen it, and kind of leverage that into whatever the next role play might be. So we found that you can really effectively flip the classroom. And the last lesson I'll call out really briefly is this model of training the trainers, that we have our MBA student teaching teams. And in some ways, you know, it would be more efficient. I would spend less total time if I just went in and did the lectures. It'd be much quicker for me than the many other additional hours of meetings that I have with our MBA teaching team. But it's such a transformative experience for those students that they go on and they become ambassadors and thoughtful leaders who have a kind of a thoughtful point of view about incarceration and formerly incarcerated individuals. One of our students is in the midst of doing a startup, and she said, the first employees I hire are going to be formerly incarcerated individuals. And so I view that as a big win. And that's part of the premise of our reentry acceleration program at Columbia, is that we want MBA students involved doing the training. But the other thing I'll say is we now have a growing alumni community of students who've been through this with us and who we can now lean on and leverage to start to scale this out more, so that not each year we're not necessarily just training from scratch new MBA students. We actually have this family of former trainers who've been with us, who can help contribute and scale this. So those are some of the lessons that I feel like I've learned from doing this. I hope something in there has been useful or interesting for many or most, or maybe even all of you. And I'd be happy to talk more about that, depending on people's interests. So thanks very much.
Wow, this is just such wonderful and important work. We're so grateful that you all are sharing this with us.